agenda for today is we will resume with Azure Storage Account. We'll look at additional options, additional configurations which are available in Azure Storage Accounts. We will talk about Azure File Share, the configuration of same, and excuse me. We will start with Compute Service today. Once we are done with Azure Storage Account, this week is dedicated towards core services of Microsoft Azure, and the weekend. Uh, we also have a class on weekend, guys, on Saturday. If you have noticed, Microsoft Teams invite, it clearly says that we have a class on weekend, which is Saturday only, not Sunday. And because we need to complete this training by 1st of October, and this training was initially planned to be, starting from September 5th, which is Thursday, but due to rain situation in Hyderabad, the training got postponed because of certain unwanted situations that came there. Okay, so let's get started, guys. Please disregard background noise. So I log into my Azure portal. Okay, so I'm logged into Azure portal. Yesterday, we created a storage account in Microsoft Azure, and we did talk about all configurable options which were available while we provisioned a storage account. All the options we talked about, all these tabs and every minute configuration which was there, we basically talked about that configuration. Before we start with the topic that we need to do today, let me know if you have any question on any of the configuration that you see while you create a storage account with respect to what that configuration is, what exactly is the use case of that configuration, how does it help in production environment, anything related to the configuration, please let me know. All right. So we are going to discuss about security and cost optimization in Azure Storage Services, Azure File Share. Then comes integration with ADDS, integration with Microsoft Entra. When I say integration, it basically means authentication of Azure storage. When I say storage, basically services, which is blobs, file share, queues, tables with Entra ID. That's what integration is all about. Same is the case with integration with Active Directory domain service. It is like integration of this service with Active Directory domain service. All right. So these are the topics that we are primarily intending to cover. When I captured objectives from you guys on day one, most of you talked about Azure Storage Service. I would like to know, other than this, is there anything that you would like to cover, you would like me to cover in Azure Storage Service? Please let me know. I'll make a note of it. and I will make sure to cover it. This is what I think important from this training perspective as well as from your domain perspective is important. Anything else other than this that you want me to cover in Azure Storage Service?
Uh, Hello, Raghu.
Yes, Naeem.
Yeah. So I have a question like, once the data comes into Azure Blob storage, okay. So I mean, I'm getting data for every day. I'm getting the data after the build, okay, from lump sum of data, right? So can we create a folders automatically in the Azure Blob storage for every day, day by day,
Can we create a folder in Azure Blob automatically for what?
day by day, every day? So I'm getting data every day, right? So as to notify the data when it has been
No,
pulled.
so your question is can we create a folder? Folder basically means container, right? Azure.
Dynamic folder, yeah, container, right? In the container, we are going to create a folders, right? We can able to create folders.
Yes.
So I required like see today I have got a files like 5 files. So
Okay.
these 5 files should be in separate folder. This
Hmm.
this folder should be automatically renamed as today's date,
Hmm.
and the folder, I mean, files which has come yesterday, as came yesterday, it should be in separate folder, like with the
Okay.
separate.
And where exactly those files are coming from?
Uh, from ADF, actually, I
Okay.
mean,
Your data factory.
from data set.
Hmm. See, what basically happens, there are two aspects to it. This is actually possible, and this exactly happens in Azure when you use Azure Storage Account. Uh, when you use Azure Storage Account as log repository, when you configure diagnostic settings for multiple services like compute service, which is virtual machine, or network service, which is Azure Virtual Network Flow Logs, or let's say for databases, app services. So wherever you configure diagnostic logs, you can stream them into a third-party solution, third-party log solution using Event Hub. Let me show you actually instead of talking about it. Okay. So for example, understand the concept, then you will have the answer yourself. Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
yes.
Let's say this is virtual machine. Now I want to ensure storing logs of this virtual machine and retaining them for a longer duration, for certain duration, so that I can query those logs as and when I am hunting for threats, or I can stream those logs to a log analytics solution or log analysis solution like SIEM solutions, which are IBM QRadar, Splunk, Alert Logic, Securonics, Logarithm, or if you talk about native solution, it's Microsoft Sentinel or any third-party solution. For that, I need to store logs. Now, how logs are stored? Exactly in the same manner that you're talking about. So if I want to do that part, I will navigate to diagnostic setting. Now, this diagnostic setting option is common to most of the Azure services. 90% of the Azure services in their resource blade under monitoring will have diagnostic settings enabled. So what you need to do for diagnostic settings, you will need to, I'm saying when you want to configure the diagnostic settings, give me a moment here. Yeah, this is the setting. So when you want to configure the diagnostic setting, you can stream those diagnostic logs into a storage account. Now it says there is no storage account here. It says no storage account available. Why there is no storage account available? Because if you look at this VM, the location of this VM is basically Canada Central. And if you navigate to your storage accounts dashboard, you have a storage account, but that storage account is in East US. So it is across region and you cannot store logs across region. Azure doesn't allow it. The storage repository must be present locally unless you're using uh, Event Hub or any streaming solution to stream logs. So what we will do, just to understand this concept, I'll quickly create a storage account with default configuration in Canada Central. Excuse me. I'm just going with default configuration. Okay. So let's just give it a couple of seconds to get created. Okay. So this is created. Now I'll navigate to my virtual machine. I'll say diagnostic settings, and I will be able to select the storage account. Okay. So now that I have selected that diagnostic setting in that storage account, what it will basically do, I'm saying this is getting enabled right now as we speak. So what will basically happen in your storage account here, this storage account, this storage account will basically have a container created. Inside the storage account, a container will be created, and inside that container, you will get folders. For each day, there will be a folder with the date. There will be 12 folders that corresponds to months of a year. There will be 30 folders that corresponds to days of a month. That's what it will do. So it happens automatically when it is about logging. Now your question is, can we have it done manually? Can we have manually when the data comes into Azure, uh, Azure storage account from Azure Data Factory? Can we have manual folder? Can we have manual folder created for each day, and that data from that clock, from that 24 hours clock, be stored in that folder, right?
Correct. Automatically also fine for us. Automatic, creation of folder automatically. For example, I got a for files. So these files comes at 11:30. So the same files should be stored at a same folder. The folder should be created at same time. Does it possible?
Yeah, see, it is possible, but there is no direct option in Azure portal to achieve this functionality. What you need to do, you basically need to use desired state configuration capability, with which you need to type a ARM template, an automation template, and that automation template can do that. So what that automation template will do, that automation template will basically create a folder at 12 a.m. Based on the time frame, time zone, whatever you give, uh, depending on which geography that data is coming from. Let's say the data is coming from India itself, right? So at 12 a.m. exactly, it will create a new folder. And any file that comes after 12 a.m. in Azure storage account will automatically be dumped into that folder, right? That folder will remain active till 11:59 p.m. IST. After 11:59 p.m. IST, another folder will get created, and any new file that comes into storage account will automatically get dumped into that folder. This is the logic that you need to think of. Now, with this logic, we need to write an ARM template, put it into PowerShell DXC, and attach it to the storage account service. That is how you can do it. Make sense?
Uh, yeah, that's okay. So where we can write this logic in automation accounts or in logic
Automation
apps?
account, but no, not Logic app. Logic app, I have not explored Logic app for this kind of capability, but for similar capabilities in other use cases, this was the solution.
So
I'll,
you want me to use these automation runbooks, right?
yeah,
Runbooks
automation.
automation.
Runbooks with PowerShell desired state configuration.
So where we can link this runbook logic in the storage account? No. So,
Okay. So you give me some time. Let me get into my repository. I may have similar solution available from previous projects. I'll see and I'll get back to you on this. Probably you don't need to do those much of efforts. Just give me some time
sure.
because this
Thank
is
you.
something
Thank
which
you.
is unique that you're asking. Okay.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Okay. I'll over the weekend I'll check my repository because I did work on similar solution in the past and I'm sure it should be there somewhere in my laptop. I just need to find it. Okay. Anything else? Anything that Anything else, guys, on Azure storage that you want me to cover? Okay. Anyways, so we'll continue. If you know, if all of a sudden, if you come up with some topic or some use case, just share it with me. Okay. Let's talk about security and then we'll talk about cost optimization also. The reason I want to include cost optimization, since we are covering core services, storage and compute, they are two main services which constitute 70 to 80% of your monthly billing in Azure. Storage and compute. Compute has its own storage in the form of managed disk, the persistent disk that you attach to a virtual machine service, compute service. And then you also have compute service taking advantage of file share, storage account containers. That option is also there. So cost optimization is very important to understand here. First, let's talk about storage, security. Now, when I talk about security, as I have told you that any storage service, Azure Storage Service, Azure Storage Service has a public endpoint. Public endpoint and Azure Storage Service, it basically falls in PaaS category, platform as a service category. Since it falls in platform as a service category, it has a public endpoint. Any service that falls in PaaS and SaaS will have a public endpoint so that you can communicate with that service. You can, work with that service. So it has a public endpoint. And that public endpoint, if you look carefully for storage account is, if you navigate to storage account, and inside storage account, when you navigate to containers, if you navigate to any object and look at the object URL, if I type this object URL, look carefully, the object URL is, first of all, it is secure, HTTPS. It starts with storage account name. That is why it has to be unique. .blob.core.windows.net. This is the public endpoint of storage account. blob.co.windows.net. And then I will say this is the URL, and then you will see the file name. Sorry. Then you will see the container name, which is Raghuvi demo. After that, you will see the blob name, the actual object name, sorry, the object name, which is Azure Fundamentals and Administration Training PPT, Azure AD PDF. That's the FQDN or URL for a storage account. And since it has .blob.co.windows.net, which is a common for all the customers, storage account name must be unique because it will remain common for all the customers. This URL will remain common for all the customers, and that is why your storage account name must be unique. That's the reason why it must be unique. Now, since Azure Storage Service has a public endpoint, when it comes to security, there are some expectations from the customers, or there are some use cases. A, in what scenarios will I use it? So my use case is that if I want, if I want to publish information to public at large. If you want to publish information to public at large, to anyone out there, it could be your customer, it could be your vendors, partners, or whosoever end users, then you should continue with public endpoint. So the use case of public endpoint is this: publish information, share or public information with public at large. That's the use case for public endpoint, right? However, when it comes that I want to use storage service for some internal purposes, I want to store data that should only be accessible to my, uh, you know, within my corporate network. In that case, we can restrict, if you want to restrict access of storage service, and this applies to all the components, which is table, queues, containers, as well as file share. If you want to restrict access of storage service within your corp network, and when I say corp network, it includes virtual network in Azure also, because your virtual network in Azure is also part of your corporate network. So when you want to restrict access of storage service within your corporate network, we basically configure that from here. So we basically navigate to security plus networking. Under security plus networking, you see this option, which is networking. Over here, you have an option. By default, it is enabled from public network. As I said, it has a public endpoint. However, whenever you want to restrict it, you can always restrict it from firewalls and virtual network setting. And you can restrict enable from selected virtual network and IP address. Right? So firewall and networking settings you can use. Configure firewall and network settings. That's the another scenario that you will find in corporates. Okay. The next scenario is, now in this scenario also, you can also use conditional access policies here with storage account, wherein you can restrict access of storage account to certain identities, to certain individuals, to certain device types based on the signals, which could be an identity, which could be a device, which could be an application, which could be a location, which could be an IP address. So based on signals, you can restrict access to storage account, which is from firewall and virtual network within your corporate network, and or from some specific public IPs. That's the second use case, right? So this was the first use case, which is public endpoint, which is by default. This is the second use case. My third use case is, now in this scenario, the storage account will continue to maintain this public endpoint. This public endpoint will continue to remain there. If you want this storage account to be used, because even if you are accessing it from inside your network, it will still use this endpoint only. It will remain the same endpoint. However, if you want to integrate storage account service with your network or domain, when I say with my network or domain, I want to disable this public endpoint of storage account. I completely want to disable it. And I want to integrate the storage account with my network and domain, which basically means that my storage account will have a private IP address, grant private IP address from your network subnet, and create a CNAME to map it with your domain. That's the third use case. So what will happen in this use case? The storage account, this is known as private endpoint. First of all, configure private endpoint. So I'll just highlight this. This is the solution basically. Here, this is the solution, firewall and network settings. So once again, if you want to integrate storage account service with your network and domain, so basically, if you want storage account application to become local to your network, similar to other applications. For example, you have other applications. What is common? I'm saying how those applications are recognized in your network. The application is hosted on a server. Server has an IP address. An application has a FQDN, a domain name through which you access the application, right? Whatever that application is, let's say HRMS application or lead management system or any system. So those are the two things. Similarly, storage account will become an application in your network. It will be granted a private IP address from your network, from one of the subnet that you designate for storage account. And you can create a CNAME record in your DNS, mapping that private IP address to a domain name, to an FQDN. And then your internal applications can access storage account either using its URL, which is the CNAME record, or using its private IP address. That's the third concept, which is creating a private endpoint. These are the three concepts or three possibilities in Azure using which I can manage or I can use my storage account for different use cases. If I want to use it for public consumption, I will continue with the default option. If I want to restrict its access to my network, I will use with the second option. If I want to completely disable public endpoint of my storage account and use my own custom endpoint, which is my FQDN, then I will go with private endpoint option. So these are the three options when it comes to securing a storage account. Are you with me on this? And all of these three options are configured under firewall and virtual network, which is if you click on disable, the moment you select the third option, disable, it will disable access. Public network access will be disabled, and then you will need to private endpoint connection. And here you will create a private endpoint connection for storage account. If you want to understand the process of private endpoint connection, I'll share a documentation with you. I'll also share a recorded session with you. You can go through it, practice it yourself. If you come across any issue, ask tomorrow. You can discuss it tomorrow. Okay, so this is the step that you need to follow. You just need to provide this basic information, wherein you will provide your resource group, the name of private endpoint, let's say demo, just some numbers, select the regions, which is by default selected, then select resource. When you will select the resource where you want to, if you want to create private endpoint for which storage service. So I would say I want to create it for Blob. So you select the Blob, then you select virtual network, in which virtual network you want the storage account to reside. So you will select your virtual network. This is the network is selected. So automatically, since this has one virtual network which is selected, then you will select a private IP for the storage account. So you can select a static private IP. You can dynamically allocate private IP to the storage account. The best practice says that always use FQDNs, not IPs. IPs may change. FQDNs remains with you all the time. Why? Because if you move from one network to another, IP will change, but your domain will remain the same. So your FQDNs will remain the same. It's a best practice in migration also, in consolidation also. So you just need to select either dynamically or statically. If you want to select any application security group, you can select here. Network security group and application security group are primarily meant for restricting access to a service that we discussed yesterday. So you can select that information if you want to select. Then next is DNS. You need to select your DNS here. DNS information. Uh, DNS information basically means that the FQDN of the storage account, what that FQDN is going to be. And then in the end, you need to select that and configure it. So that will create a private endpoint for your storage account. So just go through this and understand the concept. That's on the security part, that how do we secure our storage account. Then comes access the storage account. So this is on the security part. This is on the security configuration. Then comes accessing objects or data or files from a storage account. That's the next use case. If you want to access data, object, files, whatever you want to call it, I leave it to you. We typically call them objects in cloud terminology because it's an object storage, but you also call them files and data. So when you want to access objects, data, files from a storage account, what are my options? How can I grant access, or how can I enable access as an admin, storage account admin? So my first option is, in order to grant access to a storage account, my first option is configure Azure Storage RBAC. Azure Storage RBAC. Microsoft Azure provides you role-based access control uh, roles or policies using which you can grant access. So if you want to see what those RBACs are for storage account, if you want now over here, there are two things. Do you want to grant access to all the storage accounts or to one storage account? If you want to grant access to all the storage accounts, then you will need to configure the RBAC from subscription from here. If you want to grant access, let's say in this account, this is my subscription. I'll navigate to the access of that subscription. This is very important for you need to understand because this is your identity and access management. So over here, there is an option add. I will click on add role assignment. Now, when I add role here, so we have job function roles. Here I will say storage. Now you will see a couple of roles here related to storage account. These are the storage account roles. Forget about classic role. This is only meant for old customers. But you have roles here, which is storage account backup container, storage account contributor, storage account key operator, storage account encryption scope contributor, right? These are the roles which are available for storage account. So if you want to assign somebody access to all the storage accounts, read only access to all the storage accounts, or let's say uh, you want to assign admin access to all the storage account to somebody, then you will come here and you will select one of the role. Let's say storage account contributor is the highest privileged role for all the storage accounts. You will select the role, and after that, you will select the identity to which you want to assign that access to. So it will populate all the identities in your environment. You will select an identity, whichever you want to grant access to. You will click next. Then it will ask you some additional. Since we have, I'm saying in this account, I have, uh, Azure Entra ID Premium P2 license enabled that provides me with the capability with the name Privileged Identity Management, which is providing, which is providing, privileged access to identities for a specific time frame to deliver certain administrative tasks. So it is giving me that assignment preview, which is nothing but the UI of privileged identity management. So I can say eligible or active. If I say eligible, it means this the member that I've just selected in the previous tab, that member will have this role, storage account contributor role. However, that member will need to navigate to PIM service and elevate the access every time. And every time member elevates the access, a log is created. I can also configure an approval workflow wherein when the member elevates the access, the request goes to an approver. It could be members manager. It could be security admin or whosoever you configure as an approver, who will then approve or deny the request. You can also configure time frame, which is by default, it is 8 hours, unless you explicitly configure less than 8 hours. Uh, so that's what you can do in privileged identity management, something that we will discuss probably next week when we reach there. So I will just say active right now. It's permanent and active assignment. Click next, and I can click on review plus assign. So that way, this user, Entra admin user, will get storage account contributor or storage account admin access for the entire subscription, which applies to all the storage accounts across region in this subscription. That's one option, right? So configure Azure Storage RBAC. Let me complete. Then comes the second part. The second part is that my storage accounts belongs to different departments. Each department has their own security restrictions. So providing somebody blanket access is not recommended or is against the security policy of my environment. In that case, I can also provide resource-based RBAC. So we have two types of RBAC here. One is subscription based versus resource based. I can also provide resource based RBAC, which basically means I will navigate to that resource. Every resource in Azure has RBAC. So I will navigate to that resource, which is this storage account, any storage account in question. Let's say this storage account. And in that storage account resource blade, I see access control. I'll click on access control here, and I can click on add role assignment. That way, I can also provide RBAC to an identity, to a member user or a guest user. And this, if I follow this UI, I'm saying if I follow this approach, then only this storage account access is getting granted, not all the storage account access. So in a production environment, you will find a scenario wherein there is an admin team, probably a subject matter expert who deals with data and storage services. That person would have subscription level RBAC on storage service, and then you will have individual team members, operations people, or applications admin who have something to do with a specific storage account service. They will have resource level RBAC configured for their identity. So that's what my options are when it comes to accessing objects, data files from a storage account. And this is basically for internal users. This use case is for internal users. Now we'll talk about another use case, which is exactly opposite of it, which is accessing storage account data and files, but not for internal users, for external users. Somebody who doesn't have an identity in your Entra, in your directory, external users. Before I start with external users, I'm open to questions if you have any. Somebody had a question?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
like, yes.
So we can also give same access to separate containers as well, right?
We can do
RBAC.
to
So separate, we have containers, right, in the
in the
RBAC.
storage account.
Yeah, storage accounts. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So for RBAC, I mean, for container also we are having IAM control, access control, right, like separately.
So here's the container. Let's say I'll
Yeah,
create a container here. This is the container. You can also do it for the container. Over here, you can do for the container also inside the container. So you can grant the access to the entire storage account service. You can grant access to a container within storage account. You can grant access to all the storage accounts within a subscription. All the options are possible.
if we are giving access to all the subscription, those who have the subscriptions, and then the person will get the access, right? You're saying, for
All the
example,
subscriptions, you mean to say if there are 20 subscriptions or there is one subscription?
yeah, if I'm giving a access to one subscription one, okay. So the person who is having that subscription can able to access uh, all the resource groups in the subscription, right? Correct.
No, no, not all the resource groups. See, resource group is separate, storage account is separate. Resource group is nothing but a container. See,
Correct.
this is another. See, understand. If you grant somebody access from this window, if you navigate to subscription, and if you use subscription IN, whatever access you are granting, that access will be across subscription to that service. If you are granting somebody access, let's say if you from here, if you are making somebody as contributor, it's a privileged role. The person is contributor for the entire subscription, which includes all the services and resources. If you are granting somebody storage account contributor from here, the person becomes storage account contributor for all the storage accounts which are tagged to this subscription, right? That's the logic here. Then comes
Yeah,
resource
I
group.
got.
Resource group is a lower level container. Subscription is a higher level container. Resource group is a lower level container. Let's say I go to resource group here. Now this is my resource group. This resource group contains multiple resources of different roles. For example, there is one network security group, there is one network, one storage account, right? It also has one route table. So these are different resources or different types. Now, if I grant somebody access over here of this resource group, let's say if I make somebody a contributor of this resource group, then by default, that person will have contributor level access to all of these resources, the existing one as well as new resources that will be added in future. The person will continue to maintain contributor level access to all the resources which are part of this resource group at any given point in time. That's the logic of resource group based. In what scenario we do it? In the production environment, we designate resource group for a business unit, for an application, for a specific initiatives, or for a POC, right? For a department. And we keep all relevant resources of that department, project, initiative, POC, business unit, operations, application into the same resource group. And since there is a team who manages that application or business unit or resources, you basically grant those resources access at the resource group level instead of resource level, instead of subscription level. This is the reason we call that Azure has fine-grained RBAC. When I say fine-grained RBAC, it basically means that you can apply access at subscription level. You can apply access at resource group level because that's the next in line, or you can apply access at resource level. So either apply it at the subscription level, then by default it applies to these both. If you apply it at the resource group level, then it only applies to the resources which are part of that resource group. And if you apply it to the resource level, then it only applies to that resource. That's how the hierarchy is propagated in Azure or in any cloud. Make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah, in future you are going to tell about the PIM, right? Actually, you have mentioned about the PIM.
Absolutely.
Once we, uh, and also you have mentioned that it will be a valid the option called eligible and active. So if we click the option in eligible, it will access the. We need to go to PIM and we need to activate the access, right? Activate the access. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
So once
Yeah.
the activity get approved, then we will get the access within
Yeah.
for 1 or 2 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
So it is directly linked with the PIM, right? Here, and also does it link with the My Access, which is provided by this Microsoft?
Absolutely. myaccess.microsoft.com, you will be. See, Microsoft is evolving. What is happening here? These capabilities were not available from day one, or you can yourself see it says assignment type preview, right? Which basically means that this view was not available probably last week or last month. It says preview. Maybe they have only added it yesterday or today or this morning or probably last week. We don't know because it is in preview. I can tell you, I have started to see this activity for the last 1 month. Prior to that, I did not have this tab here. And this tab is very unique. This tab is only shown when you have premium P2 license for your Entra ID. If you are using a free license of Entra ID, you will not see this tab. Why? Because free license doesn't support PIM capability, so they are not showing this tab. This is only shown to premium P2 licenses. So what Microsoft is trying to do, Microsoft is trying to make your life easier. Microsoft is trying to help admin to configure all access from one view only. Instead of first configuring the access here and then go to PIM and configure it, or configure it from PIM and then come here, Microsoft is doing it in the same window. That's what Microsoft is doing it. So they are evolving. They will continue to evolve. And you will only remain relevant, or you will only remain up to date when you actually use the console almost every day. If not every day, once in a week, so that you are always aware of any new capability that is being added into the system. Make sense?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. All right. So this was the use case when you want to grant somebody access to your storage service, and that somebody happens to be an internal user. Now, when I say internal user, it applies to both member user as well as guest user. That's internal user. Then the second use case. The second use case is when you want to grant similar access. I'm saying you want the other person who is an external user who has no member or guest account created in your directory, who has no relationship with your directory, but you want to share access. That's the second use case that you need to be aware of. So before guys, I'm back. Let's get started. Is everyone back?
Yes.
Okay. So guys, what you need to do, I'm saying this is the concept and hands-on lab both, wherein you can just create one additional user in your Azure account in your directory and grant that user access to Azure storage account from subscription, uh, and then see how the behavior looks like. Then grant another user access to, let's say, resource group where the storage account is hosted. Then see the behavior, and then grant another user access to the storage service resource only and see the behavior. Probably grant reader access and see whether user is able to provision a new storage account, make configuration changes to the existing storage account, and then see whether user is able to do that or not. And definitely user will not be able to do that because it's a reader role. Then elevate the access, grant grant elevated permissions, which is contributor access, and try to do that activity again. You will see that the user is able to do that. So that way you can actually do hands-on lab around this topic. I'll move on to the second one, which is how do we grant access to external users? Now, when it comes to external users, there could be n number of scenarios here. So when I take interviews for my clients, this is my favorite question that I ask from the person to gauge his or her understanding of Azure storage concepts. Now, there is a scenario here. Let's say, as I said, you are into manufacturing industry, right? Now, in the manufacturing industry, there is a lot of manuals, lot of warranty, guarantee stuff, safety manuals that you basically publish for each product, and you want to share it with public at large. So you can put those manuals here in the first option, which is share publish information to public at large. So create a dedicated storage account with public endpoint enabled, which is by default, and upload all the data there. And then basically integrate it with your domain, and on your website somewhere create a module in which you can put the URL and users will be able to access it. The perfect example of it is our COVID vaccination certificate. Download COVID vaccination certificate on your mobile phone and look at the URL carefully, address bar on the browser carefully. You will see that it is coming from S3 bucket. S3 bucket is equivalent to Azure Storage Account Container. S3 is an object storage service from Amazon Web Services from AWS. So the COVID vaccination certificates of citizens of India, they are stored in an S3 bucket, which is configured in Mumbai. And this is for all the COVID vaccination certificates. Even if you download that certificate from third-party websites, like these days, if you navigate to Yatra or Make My Trip or IRCTC website, you will find a link that says download COVID certificate, because sometimes you require while traveling. So they basically have provided you a link. That link is basically using an API call to request that certificate from S3 bucket. So the repository of that certificate is an S3 bucket. So why did the government choose an S3 bucket? Because this is a public information. This must be available to everyone at large. So you can download the certificate. The only difference with COVID certificate and safety manual is that anybody can download any safety manual, but you can only download your own certificate, where in the S3 bucket they have enabled the authentication mechanism. So you will need to type your Aadhaar card number, your phone number, any authentication mechanism that will validate your identity, and relevant certificate will be downloaded on your device. So that's the perfect use case here, which is share public information to public at large. Now over here, the use case could be, let's say you have a vendor that provides support. And so you have a vendor that provides support, and business needs to share some, I would say, confidential data, once again, files, objects with the vendor. That's one example. So there is a vendor who basically provides support to TCS, and you basically need to share some data with the vendor, and you cannot share that data over email. Why? Because the size of that data is, let's say, 1 GB. You can't transmit 1 GB data over email. So you will need to think of a different measure. Second, emails can be intercepted. So you can't take that risk also, even if that data is, data size is small. There are challenges with emails. So you need a mechanism through which you can securely share the data. And it is not sharing the data. This is also, let's say, vendor wants to share some data with the business securely. It's other way around also. Your vendor wants to share some data. How will you enable your vendor to share data with you securely? That's the another use case. Now, in my interviews, the question that I typically ask from candidate is that, great, I like your candidature and I would like to go ahead with your candidature. I'll ask my HR to send you an offer letter. However, she'll not send you the offer letter through email because email accounts can get compromised. Your offer letter will contain your, financial information. I'm saying in terms of the package that we are offering. So we want to share it securely. So my HR will upload that offer letter into an Azure storage account container since it's Azure interview actually. And you tell me how will you access it or what will my HR do to securely share it with you. And you should be only able to open that offer letter. Nobody else in this world should be able to open it. That's one condition. Second, you should be able to download the offer letter, put your digital signature on it, and upload it back to the same location. And when you do that, my HR must get a notification that something has been updated. And she will open that offer letter, find your digital signature, and she'll consider that as an acknowledgement of your acceptance of the offer. That's the scenario. And I ask my, you know, candidates to answer to basically provide the answer of this scenario. A, how as an admin they will enable this functionality. B, how as an end user they will access the functionality. So the same scenario here, that vendor wants to share some information with you, or you want to share some information with the vendor, but you want to share it securely. That's the scenario here, which is for external users. Now there are two options here to enable to basically achieve this functionality. The first option is you can go with the first approach, which is create an account, create a member user for the vendor or a guest user for the vendor, grant that user appropriate access to that storage account container where data resides, and vendor can access that data. But we are not going with the first approach because my company policies do not allow an identity for external vendors. I can't even create a contractual, account for them, contractual identities for them. So that is where the second option comes into the picture. So before I share the answer, before I share the solution, I would like to see if any of the participants is aware of the solution, that what exactly we can do to achieve this use case. Who is aware of this use case? It's a very common use case, guys. I'm saying you will come across this use case a number of times in production also. Am I audible, guys?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the use case here? Okay, let's talk about the solution. So here's the problem statement. The problem statement is that I have a storage account. This is my storage account, testing storage 2024. This storage account, first of all, I'll make it a secure storage account. So this storage account doesn't allow access from internet. It says allow blob anonymous access. I'll say disabled. Now nobody will be able to access the storage account. It's a secure storage account by the virtue of this configuration which I did, which basically means that even if somebody, if by any chance, if somebody even gets the URL for any of the documentation, they will still not be able to access it. For example, this is my object. Even if you have this URL with you, if you type this URL in the browser, it will not work. It will say public access is not permitted on this storage account, right? So public access is not permitted. However, this document is actually a contract that I need my vendor to sign and acknowledge so that we can renew their existing relationship. And since the size of this document is 500 MBs, I cannot send this document via email because email doesn't support 500 MBs of file. I can't even take a print of it and ship it physically to my vendor because there are 2000 pages. So it doesn't make sense to, affect the environment by taking a print of 2000 pages and then, sending it through physical courier. I need another strategy, a strategy that is that doesn't involve cost, that is quick, and that is equally secure, more secure. So, and this is that contract. Just assume that this document is that contract. Okay. So how will I share? So for that, I have a concept in Azure Storage, which is known as SAS, Shared Access Signature. Shared access signature is the solution to this problem statement. So what I will use this capability, shared access signature, to grant time bound. Now the capability that it brings on the table is this. It provides time bound specific access of objects. So you can provide time bound for limited number of hours, specific access that you want to provide of objects. So what is my objective? That my vendor should be able to open it, should be able to sign it and send it back to me. That's what my objective is, right? So as an admin, this is what I'm going to do to enable this functionality. Right now, my vendor is not able to access it. You've seen it because vendor can only access it through this URL. Vendor doesn't have access to Microsoft Azure subscription. So vendor cannot log into Azure portal and navigate to this place and access it. The only way they can access it is this URL. However, when they type this URL into the browser, it says public access is not permitted. Excuse me. So vendor cannot access it actually. And I need to enable this access for my vendor. It's a requirement, business requirement. So how will I do that? So what I will do in this case, as an admin, I will navigate to the storage account. Look at the options carefully, guys. You can do that in your respective environment also to test it along with me. I will navigate to the storage account. There is an option with the name shared access signature. This is the option. I will click on shared access signature. And over here, I will have some configurations to do. It says a shared access signature is a URI that grants restricted access rights to Azure storage resources. You can provide a shared access signature to clients who should not be trusted with your storage account key, but whom you wish to delegate access to certain Azure storage resources. So this is what you do. How do I create it? Now my storage account contains 4 services: Blob, files, queues, and tables. So this is the storage account that I want to grant access, testing storage 2024. It contains that contract. Where exactly that contract is? In the container. What is that container equivalent to? Blob. So I will only select allowed services blob, that I want to grant access to blob only. Then in the next, it says allowed resource type. Inside that blob, blob is a service, and then blob is nothing but a container, and the access that I want to grant is an object. So I will select all the 3 options after blob. Then what kind of permissions I want to grant? I want my vendor to read it. I want my vendor to write it also. Write basically means make changes to the document. So write I want to give. Delete I don't want to give. I don't want my vendor to be able to delete anything. List, yes, if there are multiple objects in that container, then vendor should have list capability. Add capability basically means upload anything. So vendor will download it, and then vendor will make changes to it and then upload it back into my storage account container. So add capability needs to be there. Create capability. Do I want to give create capability? Create basically means that vendor will be able to put additional objects to my container, additional objects. So that's what create capability. So I'll also give you a demo of create simultaneously. Update, no, because if you remove delete, this will automatically be removed. Immutable storage, if your storage is immutable, as I explained yesterday, you can see, and permanently delete, no. So I've decided, I have allowed the permissions that this is what I want to grant. Then blob versioning permissions, enable deletion of versionings, I'm removing it. Allow blob index permissions, that I will leave it as it is. Why? Because if there are multiple blobs, then the vendor should be able to index it. That's okay. Then it's a time bound. When I'm granting access to somebody, it is not a permanent access. It's a time bound access. I can decide whether I want that access to be available for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hour, 5 hour, 10 hours, 24 hours, 30 days. So let's say I'm only granting access for 30 minutes. So the access will start at 10:36. I can put the time frame here. I will say that it will start from 10:40 a.m. and it will end at 10:50 a.m. So I'm only granting access for 10 minutes. Now this 10:40, 10:50 as per which time zone? India time zone. You can change the time zone also here. Then this is very important. As I said, only that person should be able to access. Only the designated person. So when I say only the designated person, it basically means I will capture the public IP. So I'll call that person and say, hey, can you give me your public IP? So the person will provide you the public IP and you will type the public IP here. So for example, I will capture my own public IP to show you the demo. So that's my public IP actually, which is coming from my ISP. I'll put my public IP here. So I'll put this public IP. Only this public IP is able to access for 10 minutes within this time frame. Protocol, how this public IP will access? HTTPS. I'm only allowing HTTPS access, secure access. That's it. And then I will generate the SES and connection string. So I will generate the SES with this information. SES is generated. Now I have three options here: SES token, connection string, and blob service SES URL. If an individual, if a person needs to access it, I will share SES URL. If an application needs to access this data, I will share connection string. If you are doing any SAML or OAuth authentication, and through authentication you want to grant access to this data, this is the token that you will share here. So these are the three things that I get. So what is relevant in this use case is SES URL. So I'll copy this URL, and I'll share this URL with the person. I will drop this URL in an email. Even if the email is intercepted. So this is the URL that I'll copy, and I'll copy it on my notepad. And I'll also put this URL in the chat window. And I will assume all of you as hacker. So this URL is compromised. Somehow you got access to the URL. Even though you have access to the URL, even though you see in the URL there is a public IP which is embedded, you will still not be able to access the document. You all can try. So from personal laptop you can try. From TCS laptop you will not be able to do that. Zscaler will block you. From personal laptop you will be able to try. So even if you change the public IP here, you will not be able to access this URL. So let me show you first how will I access it. So I'll get these. So this SES URL will be shared. Okay, so this SES URL will be shared with the vendor through an email. And even if that email is intercepted, don't bother about it. Only that vendor will be able to open the document. No other person will be able to open it. So I've sent the URL to the vendor. Now I'm the vendor, and I'll show you how will I open it and how will I use it. So in order to open it, I will need to use a tool, which is a freeware tool from Microsoft, which is known as Azure Storage Explorer. So it seems that I deleted it from my system. No worries. So with the email, I can also send instructions to the person if I'm doing it for the first time. If that person is a regular vendor, then then the person would have access to this. So this is the tool, Azure Storage Explorer, that vendor will basically download and install on their system. So I'll download and install it real quick. It's downloaded. I will install it. It's getting installed. It's a new version basically. You can install it for Windows, for Linux, for Mac OS, for any device. It's getting installed now. I'm running short of space on my system, so I'll probably install it in a different drive. Instead of C, I'll install it in D. Okay, this is installed. All right, so the Storage Explorer is installed. This is how it looks like. This is the latest version basically. How do you connect? So in the Storage Explorer, you see this option, this plug option to your left. Is everyone with me? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll click on this plug option here, which will ask me, what do you want to connect? So I will say I want to connect to a storage service because I'm the vendor with whom that URL is shared. So I'll say I want to connect to storage service, and then it will ask me, how do you want to connect? You want to connect with a connection string, you want to connect with a shared access signature, or you want to type account name and key, which is like logging into Azure Storage with valid credentials. So I select the middle option. I'll say I want to use shared access signature URL. I'll click on next, and here I will type the URL. So the URL which I have here in my notepad, I'll type the URL and I'll say next. When I say next, it will ask me to connect and the connection will be made. So the connection is made here. You can see here testing storage 2024 is there. I can expand it. It says blob container. I will once again expand it. It will say Raghuvi demo, which is the container, actual container. There are two containers, logs and demo. I'll double click on it and I'll see the file here. Azure Fundamentals and Administrator. Now, what was the capability that was granted to me? Read and write. I did not get delete capability, right? So if I want to delete this file because this was shared with me, I will not be able to delete it. So see, I'll select this file and I'll say delete. On the top, you see delete option. I'll say delete. See what will happen. It says, are you sure want to delete this file? I'll say, yeah, please go ahead and delete it. And see what it says. Failed to delete. At the bottom, you can see it says failed to start delete insufficient credentials. I cannot delete this file because that capability was not granted by the admin. admin only granted me read-write capability. So when I have write capability, I can download this file on my system. So let's say I download the file on my system. It is downloading the file. You can see at the bottom, you will see the activity and status. So it is right now downloading the file. File is downloaded. It's there under downloads. Over here, you can see the file on the top. It says today's date 10:49 a.m. and I can open this file, right? So I open this file quickly and I put my digital signature here in this file. Use a certificate, digital signature. Okay, now it's 10, it is about to get 10:40, 10:50. I will lose access to this file real quick. I've already downloaded it, so it will be there with me. So I'll put my digital signature here. Let's say, where is my digital signature? Use a certificate, digitally sign. So I put digital signature. I'll save it back to downloads. So now the file has digital signature on it. That's exactly what I wanted 2 times. I wanted to update the file. I've updated the file. Now I'll go back to the container once again. Click on upload, upload file, because I've got write permissions. I'll select my local system from here. No file selected. Go to downloads, select this file, click open and upload. And see it is uploading the file. And it is not done. Why it is not done? Because my SES is expired. It's 10:51 actually. Look at my system, it's 10:51. So this SES expired. Now I will not even have access to this file. If I just refresh, I will lose access to this file. See, the moment I refreshed, I lost access and it says the SES used to connect to this blob container has expired. So that's the concept of time bound. Only for the time frame the access was given will work. It was given for 10 minutes till 10:50. I was able to download, but the moment I tried to upload, the URL expired, so I'm not able to do that. I will probably need to ask my ask business once again to share another URL because this expired. But I was able to show you at least how to use it, how to use that URL. We never granted delete permission. If I go back to the portal where this is still open, you can see delete permission was not granted. That was the reason when I tried to delete it, I was not able to delete. However, write permission was granted. That was the reason I was able to download it. I put the digital signature, and when I was about to upload, this 10:50 27 a.m. time strike, and I was not able to upload. Otherwise, since I was given add permission and create permission, I was able to upload it. And if I wanted, I could have also created, created additional objects into the container. So I'll show you once again. Probably I'll increase the time frame now. I'll say let's make it 10:59 or 11:59. 11:59. And with that, I'll generate the once again. So I've generated it once again. Sometimes it doesn't refresh, guys, when you do it like this. It may not work, but let's just copy it once again. Let's go to Storage Explorer. I will click on this sign once again, plug sign, select the storage account, select shared access signature, put the service URL once again, hit next and connect. It's connecting, it's connected. You can see I see my contain document once again. So document is there. Since I was given create access, you can see I will be able to add additional data. So I can click on upload. I can upload the same file now. I've selected the folder for upload actually. So I'll select file. I can upload the same file. You can see after putting digital signature on it, this time it will work. Look at the bottom, it is transferring. There's a conflict. It says there's a conflict. Why? Because you already have a file with the same name. So what I will do, I will say replace, apply to all conflicts. It will replace the file. Why am I able to replace the file? Because I have write permissions and I have create permissions. So I've got I'm saying, if you take the other use case of interview, HR sent me the offer letter. I access the offer letter securely. I download it on my system. Then I put my digital signature on it and I uploaded it back to the container. My job is done as a candidate. Now, as soon as I uploaded it back, the monitoring is enabled for the storage account. And the monitoring has a matrix enabled, which is whenever there is a change in the storage account container object, please create an alert and send an email notification to somebody. So that somebody is HR in this case. HR will quickly get a notification that a blob object has been modified in the storage account container with the name of that object. So HR will know, oh, this was the offer letter for Raghuveer. Raghuveer did accept it. That's the reason I'm getting this email. So this is the perfect use case for SaaS, and there could be n number of use cases that you can think of. But this is the method through which you can securely share the access of your storage of your data, mission critical data, or storage account blob data, blob objects with external parties without granting them access to your environment, without compromising the security of your storage account service. If you remember, my storage account was configured to not allow public access. So even though it was configured to not allow public access, now whosoever I share this shared access signature with, they're able to access this storage account as well as the data which is there in the storage account, depending on what level of access I've granted. So that's the concept here. Now, one thing that you did not check, I need a volunteer here. Whosoever is using a personal laptop, please go ahead and download the Storage Account Explorer service. And you already have this URL with you. Go ahead and try to access it. You will get access denied. Even if you modify this URL by removing the public IP, which is already there, and replacing it with your IP, even though you will not be able to access it. So I need this to be shown in the recording so that it is completed. So this exercise is 100% complete. So who can share the screen, guys, real quick? Whosoever. So nobody is able to do that, but that's okay. We have another way of doing it. Absolutely, there is always a way out. So let's say I'll use this virtual machine then. So we have a virtual machine, Entra virtual machine. Now this virtual machine obviously is in Canada, and it doesn't have the same IP which was granted in the SES URL. So let's try and do it from this virtual machine. I just wanted you to see this capability. So I'll connect to this virtual machine. On this virtual machine, I will quickly download Azure Storage Explorer. All right. So Azure Storage Explorer is up and running. Now I'll copy the URL, SES URL. So I've lost that SES URL, but no worries. I'll create one more SES URL. And you can see I'm typing an IP address, a generic IP address, let's say 23.45.78.56, which means only this IP address will have access, right?
Yes, now it is.
Okay. So I lost access to the previous URL. I forgot to copy it. So I'm creating a new SES URL. You can see here with the same configuration, I'm creating a new SES URL when I'm removing the delete rights, immutable storage, permanent. I'm removing all the rights and I'm creating this URL once again. And look carefully. I've typed this email address, a generic email address, sorry, a generic public IP, and I'm creating the URL. Now this URL will only work on this public IP. So I'll copy the URL here and I go to my machine. This is my virtual machine in Canada. Obviously, it doesn't have this public IP. It has a different public IP. So I try to access this URL or try to access the file on this machine. Let's say I'm a hacker. Somehow I got access to the URL. Now I'm trying to access it. And I know the process that it will require Storage Explorer service. So I type the URL here and then I hit next. And now I try to connect. See what will happen. So I tried to connect and you will see what will happen now. It says successfully added new connection. Now I'll double click on it, go to block container, and then I will get the authentication error. What it says this storage account firewall and virtual network setting may be blocking access to storage account service. Try adding your client IP address to the firewall exceptions, right? So what it is trying to say that you can't access this URL because it is not for you. This is for somebody else, not for you. That's what it is trying to say. So nobody will be able to access the URL. Now let's say I play smart. What I do, I go to the URL once again. I go to this window once again, put the URL, and in the URL, I can see there is an IP address, which is here. This is the IP address. I will replace this IP address with my IP address, my system IP address. So my system IP address is this. This is the IP address of my machine. You can see 2063.8.149. I'll copy this IP address, go inside the machine and replace it with the existing IP address. I've replaced it. And now I will try to connect. Once again, it has added the connection. When I try to access the containers, see, I'll get the same error, authentication error. It says that your IP address is not listed. So even if you try to manipulate the URL by changing some string, by adding your IP address instead of the other one, existing one, even though it will not work. Because when this request goes to Microsoft Azure Storage Service, it will compare the URL and the configurations with respect to the public IP with the original SaaS signature, original SaaS URL. And if it does not match, then you will get the authentication error. So the point is, the use case that we were talking about is proved here that it is time bound. It is specific access of objects, whether read, write, whatever access you are giving, and only the designated person is able to access it here. Only the person whose email address has been put, sorry, whose public IP has been put can access this object. Is everyone with me on this use case? Yes, no, maybe? Yes. Thank you. All right. If you know this in Azure Storage Service, you know everything about storage. This is the, I would say, the highest use case in Azure Storage, because rest of the use cases with respect to granting access through RBAC, everybody knows. But there are so many people who are not aware of this use case, that how do I securely share objects from my storage service without compromising its security with external parties, that too time bound, specific access, and restricted to certain IPs. That's the highest security use case of Azure Storage Service that I have just described, as well as shown you a demo of, both from hacker as well as legitimate user perspective. Great. So that's about the use case. So this was about the security, guys. This is all about security of Azure Storage Service. Other than this, when it comes to security, the other thing is encryption. As I already talked about yesterday, that by default, Azure is encrypting all data in its data center. Default data encryption is enabled in Azure across all storage repositories. That's the default option. However, for production environments, it is recommended to use their own keys. When I say their own, it is known as customer managed keys, to use their own encryption keys for added security. That's another thing that you need to know. In a production environment, never ever depend on default encryption, because Azure can actually read your data if they need to, or if they are forced to do so, to share that data. But for your own keys, Azure cannot do that. Even if they are forced by enforcement agencies to share data, they will be sharing the data, but those agencies will not be able to read it because it's encrypted. And to decrypt it, they need encryption. They need the master key with which encryption was done. And since they will not have access to master key, they will not be able to read data. So for production environment, make sure that you use your own encryption keys. That's another thing on encryption. Second, for encryption in transit, use TLS 1.2 wherever possible. That's another security control that you need to be aware of. So use TLS 1.2. Even if your application doesn't support TLS 1.2, try and upgrade the application. Don't use lower TLS versions. They are not secure. They have vulnerabilities. We have TLS 1.3 also available now, but Azure has not started supporting it. So use TLS 1.2 wheresoever possible. That's another best practice or another security of a storage service that you need to be aware of. The other thing is, okay, so this is about security. Then comes, so this is about security of Azure Storage Service that you need to be aware of. And the common best practice, which is related to IAM also, which is use least privilege access. Least privilege access basically means do not unnecessarily grant privileged access to identities in your directory. Provide them least privilege access and grant them administrative access through PIM service, which is once again time bound and moderated and proctored. I'm saying monitored or approved by somebody who is senior to you, who understands the replication of those access. So this is a common best practice. Use least privilege access. This is about security of Azure Storage Service, especially for containers. That is all. If you know all of this, you know everything about Azure Storage Service and security. Okay. Then comes the next, which is cost optimization part. Now, when it comes to cost optimization in Azure, there are multiple options. Cost optimization. The first option is use standard storage wherever possible. So use standard storage wherever possible. Don't use premium unless explicitly needed. Unless you need good performance, read-write performance, use standard storage. That's the first thing. Second cost optimization option is use a combination of hot, cool, and archive tier. Use a combination. Any data that you need to access more frequently, put that into hot tier. Any data that you access once in 30 days, put that into cold tier. Any data that you don't access, you only access when there is a audit that happens in your environment, or once in a blue moon when there is some customer who approaches for that data, or you are doing some internal investigations, probably once in a year or once in 6 months, use archive tier. So by using a combination of it, you will be able to save a lot of cost. The third thing, use storage lifecycle management. This is another thing that you need to be aware of. Use storage lifecycle management policies. Now, what is this storage lifecycle management policy is? This policy is basically means, okay, this, so policy word all of a sudden reminded me one more security control that you can enable in storage, which is use MFA delete, which basically means challenge users to satisfy additional additional authentication, additional factor authentication when they try to delete an object from storage account or the storage account container. You can configure this also. Whenever a user accidentally, intentionally, in the influence of alcohol, tries to delete an object from a storage account or the storage account container or the entire storage account, user will be challenged with an additional factor authentication that will probably bring user to senses. If there is an illegitimate activity, if there's a hacker or if there is any malware or ransomware which is trying to delete something from your environment, that ransomware, malware application, or illegal user will not be able to satisfy that MFA challenge. So that way you can further stop the probability of incident in your environment by making use of MFA delete. So you can configure MFA delete also. That is another security measure to protect your storage account servers. Okay. Use storage lifecycle management policies. Now, what these policies are? See, when you have humongous amount of data in your storage account, let's say 10 terabytes of data, 100 terabytes of data, how will you move that data from one tier to another? See, on day one, when you upload data into storage account, you can decide, okay, I'm uploading this data into hot, this into cool, this into archive tier. But what happens later on? That data continues to remain in hot, in cool and archive tier. Now, let's say you have 10 terabytes of data in hot tier, and some of those files or objects have not been accessed for a long time, but they continue to occupy space in hot tier. And by virtue of that, you continue to pay more bill while you should be paying less because you're not using them. So you should manually move data from one tier to another, from higher tier to lower cost tier. But is that really possible when you have millions of data, millions of files, millions of objects, billions of objects? No, that's not possible. That is where automation comes into the picture. So storage lifecycle management policies are fully automated. They are fully automated policies based on the logic that you will configure in this policy. The policy will have the capability to move data from a higher cost tier to lower cost tier. That way you can significantly save a lot of money from storage cost perspective. Let's understand this policy. So in the storage account, okay, let me first get rid of this VM and say just disconnect from this VM. Every penny counts. So I'll disconnect and I will shut down the VM. And they will only charge me for the last 10-15 minutes while this VM was turned on. I'm stopping the VM because I don't need it. All right. VM is getting stopped. Now I'll move to storage service. So let's say I want to configure the policy here. So you have an option in the under monitoring, no, monitoring classic, automation. No, that's not the one. No worries. Let's go inside. They keep on changing the view from here and there. Data storage, probably here, containers. networking, front door access, shared access, Microsoft Defender, data management, redundancy, replication, data protection, object replication. Over here, lifecycle management. So click on lifecycle management, and here you can create a rule. So I'll show you the example. Let's say I'll create a rule, rule demo. It says apply this rule to all blobs in your storage account. So let's say in your storage account, you have multiple blobs. You want to apply it to all the blobs or some of the blobs. If you want to apply it to all, select the first radio button. If you want to apply it to some of them, then you need to just put a filter. So let's say I want to apply this policy to all the blobs. Then we just need to click on next. And here we can create this rule. In the backend, it uses Logic App Service because it's a workflow management. It's a workflow that you are creating. So the workflow is, it says if blobs were last modified more than. So let's say I want to move all the objects from hot tier to cool tier if they were not modified or used in the last 30 days. So I will say if blobs were last modified more than 30 days ago, more than 30 days ago, then do what? Instead of deleting, move them to cool storage. So I'm moving them to cool storage after 30 days. Then I'll add another policy, which is if blobs were last modified, created after this. So let's say I move a file, an object. There was a file which was kept in hot tier. It was not used in the last 30 days. It will get moved to cool tier. Then it will stay in cool tier, let's say for 60 days. Another 30 days from day one. And if it was not accessed in the last 30 days there in the cool tier also, which is total 60 days, then I'm moving that to archive tier. Move to archive tier. Right? So that's how I can add the policy. Now I can add another. If it was not accessed in the archive tier, let's say for 180 days, which is another 90 days from there, 180 days for 6 months. So the file remains in archive tier for 6 months and still nobody is accessing it, which makes me believe that this file is actually not needed because nobody has accessed it for the last 1 year. It was there for 30 days in hot tier, nobody accessed it. Then it got moved into cool tier, remained for another 30 days, nobody accessed it. Then it was staying in archive tier for 180 days, 6 months, nobody used it. Probably it is not needed at all. So in the end, I will put delete the blob. So I'll create this policy. So the policy is created, the first policy, which will apply to all the blobs in the storage account, which will keep moving an object when it is not used in the last 30 days, 60 days, and 180 days. And in the end, the object will be deleted. So now it's all automation that I'm putting in place, and I don't need to manually manage it. Now the question is, what if that object is used or read or written? What if that object or file is read or written or used? In that case, it will come back to hot tier. So let's say the file is in cool tier after 30 days, and then all of a sudden an application needed access to that file, to that data, and it tries to access it. So the moment that file is accessed, this policy, this workflow will automatically move that object from wheresoever it is. If it is there in the archive tier, it will be moved to cool tier. If it is in cool tier, it will be moved to hot tier. And then it will remain in hot tier for another 30 days. If nobody accesses it, it will come back to the cool tier. If nobody accesses it, it will go back to the archive tier. And if nobody accesses it for 180 days, it will be deleted. Now, after 180 days, if an application tries to access it, it will get an error, resource not found, because that's what my policy does. So if you feel that you don't want to delete it, then you can just stop the rule then and there in the third place, and you can add the rule. So we can create multiple lifecycle management rule for for storage accounts based on our business requirements. For mission critical data that need to be retained for 10 years, we can probably archive it to we can probably store it into the archive tier. through the policy and keep it there. For data that does not need to be retained, we can use the same policy which I just created. After 1 year, the data is deleted when nobody is using it. So that way you will save a lot of money from the cost perspective. Okay. Are you with me on this concept, lifecycle management? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what we can do. That's another cost optimization options. Now, for a moment, we're talking about cost. I'll show you exactly what it cost you, and so that you understand the difference. If you want to see the cost of an Azure service, you can navigate to pricing calculator, which provides you approximate cost of a service on monthly basis, so that you have a fair idea of how much you will be paying for that service if you use that in Azure. So we'll go to storage account service and pricing calculator, and I'll show you the cost. Let's say I want to calculate the cost of storage. Let's say I want to store 10 terabytes of data in Azure for in Azure South India region in Chennai. So I'll select the region as South India. Blobs I will select, which is your files, blobs standard performance tier. Right now I'm taking standard, and I'm putting that data into hot tier. LRS is the locally redundant storage is the redundancy, which is 3 copies. And this is 1000 GB, 1024 GB is 1 TB. I will add one more zero, it becomes 10 TB. So for 10 terabyte of storage per month on pay as you go, which is normal plan, I am paying $243 for 10 terabyte of storage per month in hot tier with LRS as redundancy. I'm paying $243 per month. That's my monthly cost. And that is in the magnetic storage. If the same amount of data I will put into premium storage, SSD, my cost will be 2,304, which is almost 10 times, right? Or if you want to keep it simple, let's just do 1 terabyte. So for 1 terabyte of standard storage, I'm paying $24 per month. When my data is in standard performance, when its access tier is hot, when its redundancy is LRS. Let's say for the same amount of data in cool tier, how much will I pay? So if I use cool tier for the same amount of data, I'm paying $15. So from $24 to $15. And for the same amount of data, if I'm putting it into archive tier, I'm paying $3 only. So $3, $15, $24. See the difference. That is why lifecycle policy is important, because it will save you from paying $24 for each terabyte of data, and you will only pay $15 when that data moves to cool. And when it happens to move to archive, you will only pay $3. So that's how lifecycle policy helps you. Similarly, you can also see the cost differential when you use redundancy as GRS. So for 1 terabyte of data in standard tier, in standard hot is costing you $24 with LRS. If I make it GRS, which is 6 copies, look at the cost difference. I'm making it GRS, and now the cost is almost double. From 24, it is $48 because the number of copies are double. And if I make it RAGRS, which is read access, then the cost is 3 times almost, $60. So from $24, it is $60 now. So this is why it is very important for you need to understand the concept of costing across storage, cost optimization. I'm covering cost optimization only in storage, not in any other service that I will do, because storage and compute collectively constitute 70 to 80% of your monthly bill in Azure. That is why. So you need to be very careful while you plan your storage. And lifecycle policy, works wonders when it comes to cost optimization, because it saves your time of manual moving data here and there, which is very tedious and not possible. B, it is all automated and it doesn't cost you anything. The policy creation service is free. but the value that it provides you in return is great, which saves you a lot of cost. Are you with me on this? The cost implications of choosing, one type of tier performance or redundancy over other? Great. So please make sure that you use this concept. So you exercise caution while you build storage service for your customers, or if you ever get an opportunity to do an assessment from cost optimization perspective, you can always suggest your customer to put in place those measures that I just talked about from cost optimization perspective. And from security perspective, if you find any of these measures missing, misconfigured, or not configured, you can probably suggest your customer to do that because it will help them in the long run. So this completes my first part. Okay, let's get started. Is everyone back?
Yes, Raghu.
Okay, so we are done with security and cost optimization in Azure Storage Service. And I have actually covered more than what was expected in this training session from cost and from security and cost optimization perspective when it comes to Azure Storage. Next is Azure File Share. So as I talked about Azure File Share, so when I said Azure File Share, it is typically an extension. I'm saying you can consider Azure File Share. There are two ways of understanding this services or using the services. First, you can consider as an extension of on-premise traditional file servers. So if you use file servers, DFSR, distributed file system replication, or file services in an on-premises environment, you can consider Azure File Share as an extension of that service, and you can also provide similar service in cloud. That's one thing. Second, you can also replace existing file services with Azure File Share. Azure File Share service you can do. Now, the benefit of this service is that it supports Windows File Share over SMB, which is server messaging block, which is the technology used by Windows for accessing shared storage services. So it uses SMB, Windows File Share over SMB. It also supports Kerberos authentication. So since it supports Kerberos authentication, you can easily integrate with ADDS, Active Directory Domain Service, because it supports Kerberos authentication. So these are some of the features of Azure File Share Service. Let's see that in reality so that you will understand it. How do we provision Azure File Share Service? So hands-on lab, provisioning an Azure File Share. Let's provision an Azure File Share and see for yourself how it works basically. Okay. So how do we provision a file share in Azure? We'll navigate to Azure Storage account once again. In Azure Storage account, under data storage, there are four options. Containers that we have just gone through and we have understood some capabilities around containers. Then file share, queues and tables. So let's click on file share. When you click on file share, it says file share is not configured. So you can configure file share. How do we configure file share? We basically create file share. So we will click on plus file share and we will create it. So I'll create a file share. I'll say demo hyphen file share. So I'm creating the file share. Now file share comes in multiple varieties similar to other services, which is premium, transaction optimized, hot and cold. You can't choose premium. Why? Because the storage account service inside which you are creating this file share is configured to use standard performance tier. So it is basically using magnetic storage hardware in the backend. That is why I cannot configure premium file share. If I want to configure premium file share, I will need to create a separate storage account with premium performance. And then in that storage account, I can create a premium file share. For this storage account, I will only configure transaction optimized, hot or cold. Now, what is the difference here? Transaction optimized is the best tier because based on how much data you store in the file share, how frequently user accesses that data from file share, the performance will be optimized. So we'll go with transaction optimized. Transaction optimized gives me a maximum IOPS. IOPS basically input output per second. How much data is read and written per second is 20,000. So 20,000 concurrent user request can be managed by this transaction optimized file share, which is more than sufficient. And maximum capacity that I can store here is 100 terabyte. So I can store up to 100 terabyte of data in this file share. If I need more, then I will create another file share. Now to use SMB protocol with this share, check if you can communicate over port 445, which is okay. These scripts for Windows clients and Linux clients can help. That's okay. So this is my file share. Then backup. Do I want to backup the file share? So data that I will store in the file share, which will be accessible to my end users, do I want to back up that data? If yes, then I will configure the Vault. Vault basically is the service which we use for backup and disaster recovery in Azure. So I'll configure the Vault and I will configure the backup frequency for that Vault. So I'll just go with the default option because any which ways we will delete this service. Next is review plus create. It is just reviewing the configuration and creating the file share. So my file share is getting created. File share is created now. After the file share is created, I can click on browse and I can see all the data in the file share. So right now you can see there is no data in the file share. It says no files found. Now, instead of putting data into blobs, into blob container, the previous option, I will upload some data into file share. See, the difference between blob and file share, the fundamental difference between blob and file share is they both have object data. They both can contain same amount of data, same type of data. You cannot map blob as a network drive to your systems. However, a file share can be mapped as a network drive. That's the fundamental difference between blob and file share. Rest of the capabilities are same. Since you can map file share as a network drive, or you can access file share as a network resource, you can also apply NTFS permissions on it if you integrate it with Active Directory domain service or Entra domain services. So first, I will upload some data into it. So I'm uploading some data into the file share. Let's say I'm uploading these files, these 3 files into the file share. Files are getting uploaded. They are uploaded. Now you will start to see those files here. So these files are available now in the file share. This is what an admin does. So admin's job is to manage file share with respect to the configuration, with respect to managing the data. Now the data is uploaded into the file share. Now the next thing is, how will I access the data in the file share, or how will I grant my employees access to file share? So my first use case is, what if I want this file share to be used as a network drive in my environment on my employee's laptop? That's first use case. So how will I connect that file share? That is the connect option here. It basically shows you the option that if you want to connect this file share to a Windows device, then these are the steps that you need to follow. If you want to connect this to a Linux device, these are the steps that you need to follow. If you want to connect it to a Mac OS, these are the steps that you need to follow. Since I have a Windows laptop, I will quickly show you the steps for Windows, right? So forget about what is written here. I will give you the simple way of attaching the file share. So what I will do, let's say as an admin, if I need to add file share as a network drive on one of the employees, I will navigate to that employee. I can do that remotely, or I can walk up to that employee and get access to the device in person and can do it also, or can do it through remote also through scripts. So what you need to do, you basically need two pieces of information to do that. So provisioning an Azure file share was the first lab that we wanted to do. We have done that. Second is mapping a file share as a network drive on employees' laptop, corporate laptop, let's say. So let's say, how do we map it? When you want to map a file share as a network drive, you need three pieces of information. A, file share URI, B, username, 3, password. That's it. These are the three pieces of information you basically need to map a file share. So where do we get file share URL? Let's get the file share URL. To get the file share URL, you will navigate to that file share, click on overview, and you will get the file share URL. You can see here file share URL when you click on overview of the file share. So let's copy the URL here and let's put it into the document. Okay, so we get the file share URL. Then we need username. We need username and password. Username is the storage account name. Storage account name is the username basically here. So what is my storage account name? This is the storage account name, testing storage 2024. So I'll copy the storage account name here. That's my username. And password is my access key. Storage account access key basically. Storage account access key is my password. How do I get access key? I will navigate to my storage account. In the storage account blade, under security plus networking, right next to shared access signature, there is an option with the name access keys. I'll click on access keys. And here I see two access keys, key 1 and key 2. They both are similar. I can pick up any key. By default, both the keys are not shown. So I can just start with first key. I'm saying I can pick up the first or second, whichever I can pick up. It is one and the same thing. So I can show the access key number 1 and I can copy it. And I can put it here. So I've got the access key, I've got the password, I've got the username, I've got the URL. That's all I needed in order to map my file share service to employees, to employees' corporate devices. Now I will navigate to an employee corporate device and map this file share. Is everyone with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So let's assume that my laptop is the corporate device. So I will map this file share on my laptop itself. So I'll navigate to my laptop or employee laptop. On the employee laptop, you will navigate to this PC if they are using Windows 10 and 11. When you navigate to this PC, on the top, you will see an option under computer map network drive. Click on map network drive and it will open this box. Over here, it says what network drive folder would you like to map? I can select the drive letter for it, whatever drive letter I want to select. Let's say I will select N as network drive. Then I will need to type the name of the folder. And name of the folder should be typed in this format: //server /share. So I will go back to my Word document and I will customize it based on how Windows accepts this. So it doesn't require this HTTPS. I will remove this HTTPS. And the / will be replaced with /. So // server. This is the server. And then another / before the file share name. That's it. This is how you will customize it. Now I will copy it and put it here. After that, there are two options, which is reconnect at sign in, connect using different credentials. You will always have this option checked so that every time your system reboots or you shut down your laptop and bring it and turn it on, the moment you turn it on, it will automatically reconnect. The network drive will automatically reconnect and you will be able to see it in your system. So you always have this box checked in. Never check this box, otherwise every time you want to connect, it will ask you for credentials. So we will have the first box checked. That's it. After this, I will hit finish. The moment I will hit finish, this system over 445 SMB will try to communicate with this server, with this file share. And if this file share information is accurate, then it will show me a prompt to provide the credentials, to provide the authentication. So I will hit finish. You can see it is trying to connect. It was able to connect, and now it is asking me to type the network credential. So I will type the network credential now. It asked me for username and password. I already have that information. Username is my storage account name, which is here. So I'll copy username from here and put it in under username field. Password is my access key, which I copied. So I'll copy the access key here. Make sure while you copy, there is no space. I've copied the access key. I can check it. The last string is equals, which is true. I can hit remember my credential so that when your system reboots, the file share will try to reconnect and it will use the same credentials, and hit OK. As soon as I hit OK, it will send these credentials to Microsoft Entra to authenticate whether these credentials are correct. And if they are correct, then I will have this file share added as a network drive with drive letter N in my local system, and it will always be accessible to me. I hit OK. Let's see what happens. Done. File share is mapped. You can see here on this PC. Now I have three drives: C drive, D drive, and a network drive with the name demo file share. The network drive, this is the network drive N, and the name is demo file share. You can see the size is 100 terabyte, space free is 99.9. If I double click on it, I will see those documents in the file share, which was put by admin. So there are three documents: device and protocol at OSI model, Microsoft Azure infographics, networking basics for public cloud. You can double check. These are the same documents which are there in the file share. So if I navigate to the file share, you will see the same documents here under browse, those three documents. So that's how you map a file share to a system. Now you can use the same method to map this file share to thousands of systems. If you don't want to do it manually by navigating to each device, then you can use this. Then you can use this option, which is connect. And here you can download the script. This is the script that you can execute from the domain controller. So all the devices which are joined to your domain, you just need to copy the script, put it into the domain controller, and from there you can execute it. And it will apply to all the devices. How? You can use the script in group policy. You can, you can push the script as group policy. You can also push this script through SCCM, like any software packaging module like SCCM or any third-party solution. Just create a package and push it to all the systems. It will execute to those systems just like you push updates on corporate devices. You can push this script. So that way you can run it on multiple systems in one go. So that's how you manage it. This is about provisioning a file share, configuring that file share to employee devices. Then comes the third and fourth part that you need to be aware of also. Third and fourth part is which is integration with Active Directory domain service to apply NTFS permissions. This is the third part of file share that you need to be aware of. Typically, not all organizations go to the third and fourth step. But in your case, if you ever see a customer willing to go here, then this is how we do it. So integration. Now, why do we need integration to apply NTFS permissions? Because if you don't integrate it with ADDS and apply NTFS permissions, then all the users who have this file share mapped on their system will have same level of rights. They will have equal rights. So for example, this is mapped on my system. I'm an end user. I can go ahead and delete any file. See, I'm deleting this file. I'm able to delete. I've deleted that file. And I can add additional files to the file share. And any user would be able to do that. So I can copy this file. I can navigate to file share and paste it here also. See, the file is pasted. And if I go back to the portal, I will see the same changes here. If I just refresh it, you will see that this device and protocol will be deleted. I'm saying will disappear, and a new file will be added. See, that is gone, and this new file is added. So any user is able to make modifications to the file share, which is not good, for an organization. That is where we need NTFS permissions. We need to be able to control what users can do. And that is only possible when you integrate your file share with your LDAP service. It could be Microsoft Entra domain service. It could be Active Directory domain service, or it could be any third-party directory service that allows LDAP, that supports LDAP, which is lightweight directory access protocol. It is nothing but a way of querying resources from a directory service. So any directory service that supports LDAP, you can configure it here. Now, how do you configure it here? So what you will do for that, you will go to overview. On the overview, there will be an option which is add directory over here. You click on add directory. No, not this one. Give me a moment. File share. Over here on the main view on file share, it says identity based access not configured. So over here, you will configure it. So you will configure it. And here you will have three options to configure. You can configure file share integration with Active Directory domain service. You can configure file share integration with Microsoft Entra domain service. You can configure file share integration with Microsoft Entra Kerberos. If you configure file share integration with Active Directory domain service, you will be able to fully enjoy NTFS capabilities, which means you can create files and folders in your file share as an admin, and you can apply policies at the folder and file level. Fine-grained policies. That is possible through Active Directory domain service. If you go with Microsoft Entra domain service configuration, then you will have limited options, because Microsoft Entra domain service is not a replacement of Active Directory domain service. It is rather an extension of it. So it provides limited capabilities. And this is a new capability that they have added, which is Microsoft Entra Kerberos. This is only for authentication of on-premises identities or Entra identities with your file share. So these are the three integration options. It clearly says that Microsoft Entra ID is not a domain controller, only a directory service. User account solely based as Microsoft Entra ID is currently not supported. So it clearly says that even if you go with Microsoft Entra approach, the second and third approach, you will not be able to enjoy all the capabilities, and it would not even support user accounts which are configured in Microsoft Entra. So which means that even if you go with second and third option, you will still need to have Microsoft Entra Connect Sync agent configured and connecting with your on-premises Active Directory domain service so that it can synchronize all identities in cloud, because only synchronized identities, will work here. Microsoft Entra identities or cloud-only identities are not supported as we speak. That is where I said that what I have seen or what I have enabled this capability is only with Active Directory domain service, because this is where it is fully integrated and it can provide you similar experience that you have with traditional file share services in Azure. So if you want to configure it, this is a 4-step process that will, you can see 4-step process is there, and you also have video tutorial for each process available. If you are interested, go ahead and do this configuration. For this, you will need to first need to provision a virtual machine in Azure, deploy Active Directory domain services on it, configure DNS services, and then you will need to use Entra Connect Sync agent to synchronize all the identities from directory to Entra ID, and you will need to configure all of this. And it's a very simple step-by-step process, which is mentioned here in this video as well as documentation. If you have interest, go ahead and configure it in your spare time. If you're stuck anywhere, just make a note of that step, take a screenshot, discuss it with me tomorrow or whenever you feel that you're ready to do that. Even if you don't want to do it during weekdays, but you have interest in this use case, do it over the weekend and then discuss it with me on Monday when we resume the session. So I can help you with this. I also have a recorded session available for this capability. If you have interest, I can share that recorded session with you also. But it's pretty much simple from here also because it has step-by-step information mentioned. So this is your integration part basically. Once you do the integration, then you will be able to apply permissions. Now, after the integration is done, you will apply permissions from RBAC. So let's say you are done with those 4 options. So let's say you have done the integration with Active Directory domain service to apply NTFS permissions. After that, all identities that are synchronized from on-premises to Entra, those identities will be granted access to file share. So you will use Azure RBAC to grant access to the file share. And there are 2 RBACs here, which I'll show you, which are here. So you'll navigate to Azure IAM. You will click on Add Role Assignments. And here you type file over here. So these are the basically there are 3 now. There is 1 more now. So these are the 3 capabilities that you need. Storage file data, SMB share contributor. Contributor is the administrator. Storage file data, SMB share reader. So if you want users, I'm say for example, I'm one of the user and you only want me to be able to read data from the file share, not able to delete or modify anything, then you will grant me storage file data SMB share reader. This RBAC will be granted to my identity, and then I will only be able to see the data. If you grant me share contributor, then I will have administrative access. I can add and delete data. This is a new role, which is shared elevated contributor. This comes from NTFS permissions, and this is enabled through PIM service. So this is the option. Now you also have 2 additional roles, which I see here, which is storage file data, privileged contributor, and privileged reader. So what is this? Customer has read, write, delete, and modify NTFS permission access on Azure Storage File Share. Customer has read access on Azure Storage File Share. Okay. So this is some additional permissions, which is here. So in total, we have 5 RBACs available, and we can pick and choose these RBACs based on our business requirements and grant them to our identities in Entra, which are synchronized from on-premises. Once again, I repeat, it doesn't support cloud-only identities or any user that you have created in Entra ID or any guest user that you have invited from external world. It doesn't support those identities. It only supports Active Directory identities, which are synchronized through Entra Sync Connect or Cloud Sync service to Entra directory. So that's about file share part that you should be.
A question. Okay.
Yes.
So if a user get created, for example, if they have a guest user created in Microsoft Entra, right?
Mhm.
So with the help of Entra Connect or Entra Cloud Sync, get a sync in the Azure Active Directory as well, right?
No, guest user is already there in Active Directory. Your so guest user basically means it's already there in Entra because guest user is added from Entra console only, or any member user that you create in Entra, which is a cloud only user, because that user is not coming from on premises. Any user identity which is not synchronized from on premises is not supported as we speak with this technology, with this, or you can say it's a limitation of this service right now, that it doesn't support Microsoft Entra identities, whether it's a member user or whether it's a guest user. It only supports those identities which are synchronized from on premises Active Directory domain service using Entra Connect Sync or Cloud Sync service. That's how it is.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Then you are saying like there's Microsoft Cloud users will not get sync with AD Active Directory on premise.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not a reverse synchronization. I would say if you have a cloud
one
user,
way. It's a one way you are saying, right? One way from on premises to, I mean, on premises to Entra. Entra
yeah,
only send the data from on premises to Entra ID, right? You're saying.
we don't have reverse synchronization. We only have forward synchronization, which means all user identities which are present in on premises, they are synchronized with cloud. Any identity that you create in cloud, it is not synchronizing in reverse order with on premises. We don't have reverse synchronization capability available in Entra as we speak. That is why
Okay.
any cloud only identity will not work with this service. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
All right. So that's on the integration part. So right now, as I said, we have three integration options, and you can use those three integration options.
One more question. What is NTFS?
NTFS stands for Network File System. It's a so there are two types of file system, FAT and NTFS file system protocols. NTFS is more secure protocol. This is what NTFS is. So if I go
Uh,
to any folder, let's say
Fed means you're saying Fedo or Fed?
this
Fido
is
or
what
Fed?
see, if I right click on this folder and go to properties, I see the security tab. You see all of these capabilities that I can provide access. I'm saying right now the security of this folder cloud expert training. Right now, who has access to it? All authenticated users have access to it. System administrators, and you can see access. The moment you click on advanced, this is NTFS, advanced security. So in the old days, we used to use FAT32, which is a file system which was not advanced in nature, which would not support user level access or file level access permissions. Then NTFS was introduced. NTFS supports folder level permissions and file level permissions. Now, over here, I can grant somebody access to this folder only. So when that person logins to my laptop, that person would only be able to access this folder and nothing on this laptop. And based on what access I assign. That's what NTFS is. So if you want to read about in detail, I can share this URL wherein you will read information about it. Give me a moment here. FAT versus NTFS. Okay, this is a good website, PC Bank. So here you can see the difference. FAT32 versus FAT versus NTFS, which format is best for your storage device. Just read this, you will get to know the benefits. So NTFS is the current file system that we use, as we speak across the world in storage services, which is more secure than FAT32. That's how it is. Make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So I put that URL in the chat window also. You can read it from here. Okay. That's the another thing that you need to try. I'm saying when we do Entra ID, we can also go through it. Right now, we have not started with Entra ID. I will also show you that how do we authorize access to blobs using Entra ID. So that's the fourth option that you can do. Integration with Entra ID. And the other thing, if you want to understand from Microsoft documentation, how do we integrate with Active Directory domain service? I have it opened also. This is the documentation which talks about Active Directory domain service authentication for Azure file shares. And in this documentation, it shows you all the capabilities. I'm saying you can configure it through CLI, through PowerShell, or you can also configure it through Portal. So all the capabilities are available. There are 4 steps. This is the first step. Then you need to go to the next one, which is assign shared level permissions. Then you need to go to the next one. This is a 4-step process basically, as it was mentioned into the portal or as it was there in the video also. So if you're interested in it, just give it a try in your lab environment. You have access to the lab
You
environment
just
restricted.
share the URL.
Yeah, I have put that into the chat window also, and I'm putting that into the document also, just for the reference purpose. Okay. So just give it a try, guys. Those I'd say it's a time-consuming activity that will take at least 45 minutes to an hour when you are done with all the 4 steps. However, if you stuck anywhere, just let me know. We will, we will spare some time outside the session because not everyone would like to go through it, and we will fix it. However, you should be able to do it. I know because it's step-by-step process. You just need to follow the documentation or video which is there. So we are done with the Azure file share also. That's all I wanted to complete in Azure file share. So we are done with file share part also. So those are the 2 things that I wanted to do today with respect to the storage service. That is all. We don't need to do anything new. Let's move on to the next topic, which is for start with compute service in Azure. Before we move on to compute service, any question from any participant on storage service?
What will be the recommendable as per your experience for integration to Azure? For example, we are having 2 storage services. One is file service and storage accounts, right?
Hmm.
Sorry, containers and file shares, right?
Okay.
So both of these, so which will be the recommendable to have a huge data and to as a dynamical usage of files folders to integrate. Send the data into other logic apps or API driven provisioning services.
Okay, you can see it depends on use case to use case, requirement basis. See, if you want to do any integration with external services, if you want to stream data from one service to another, I would rather suggest to go with Azure Storage Account Container. Don't use file share in that case. Use file share only when you want a similar experience of file server services that we use in on-premises, which is primarily meant for internal consumption of your users. Use file share in that case only. NTFS permission comes into the picture when you want to restrict users from adding additional data or deleting any existing data from file share. That's where NTFS permission comes. As long as your use case is to work with multiple services for the purpose of sharing of data, streaming data from one service to another. For example, you're using a combination of Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks, Azure Data Lake, Event Hub, Storage Account Service, Synapse Analytics, Power BI, and you want your data to be flowing from one service to another. Then the service which is suitable from Azure service portfolio is storage account container service. Use storage account container service for it because it will provide you capabilities to achieve that use case. File share is not recommended in that case.
Okay, okay. Yeah, and I also asked a question, right? For creation of folders, it is for that also um, is container is very relevant for this.
Container is relevant. File share will not work in that case. Container is relevant in that use case because you will store data in container. See, the other drawback of file share is the space. It only supports up to 100 terabyte. That too with large file share. What if you need more data? Then you will be limited. But Azure Blob Container, it supports up to 500 terabyte, which is 5 times of what a file share supports. So you should obviously go with Azure Blob Container, not with file share. File share use
One
cases
more,
to replace the traditional file servers.
yeah, one more question. Like in our case, like we are taking the data from container to Azure Logic Apps, right? Is it relevant for this? Okay.
Yeah, I'm saying you can in fact configure a couple of use cases in Logic Apps to kind of communicate with containers. In fact, in the Azure Storage Service under automation, you have some use cases for Logic App. For example, guys, when one person is asking question, it doesn't mean that it is his or her question only. This is for everyone because it's a common service that we all are doing. Don't just think that I will only focus on Entra. Entra is just one service. It will take you nowhere outside of TCS. If you have, if you aspire to do big in your life in technology space, think beyond Entra. Okay.
And hello, you are not audible.
Yep. Let me start from scratch. So
Yeah, yeah.
now
One more question.
Logic App, let me complete. Logic App is added to most of the services. For example, if you have some automation use cases in mind with respect to Azure Storage Account Service, you can achieve that from here. So in the Storage Account Service dashboard under automation, there is an option task. It is common to most of the services now. When you click on add task, you have two options here, which is send monthly cost for resources, delete old blobs. So with this logic app in place, you will be able to delete old blobs. I would say same lifecycle policy, lifecycle management policy, what it was doing. It was it you can configure it to delete blobs also after they have been modified for last so many days. Similarly, here you can also create this logic app, which will, and you can in the logic app, you will define the schedule also that you know how frequently it should trigger. So based on that schedule, it will trigger, it will search your storage blob, and if it finds any blob which meets the logic app criteria, it will go ahead and delete it. So there are multiple use cases that you can think of between Azure Storage Account Service and Logic App. Now it differs from project to project, customer to customer, industry to industry. So if you have any specific use case that I have not worked on in the past, share it with me. We will work together and probably arrive at a solution around it. Because I may need it in future. I may come across similar requirement from my customers in future asking for the same capability. Right? But these are
Yeah,
the
yeah.
options which are available right now. Give me a moment. Sheila? Okay. So that's what you can do. I'm saying you can have some use cases with logic app between logic app and storage accounts from here. Okay, great. Any other
Uh,
questions,
what
please?
what will be the particular integration point to other services from here? Like for example, Logic App, for suppose service integration for recurrence of data to Logic App from storage apps.
That will be in the logic app. You know, when you configure logic app, you select the workflow type, right? There you have recurrence, events, all that. So you
Okay.
will configure that from logic app. When we do logic app, we can discuss it at that point in time. But right now you can just understand that yes, we have integration options between logic app and storage account. And some common integration options are already made available by Azure, which is here. Definitely, you just need to provide some basic information. It will be configured. In the backend, it will create a logic app. So you can once you configure it, and so you can try it in your lab environment, configure it, and then navigate to the logic app service. You will see a logic app against it. Navigate to the designer to see the workflow, that what workflow it has created in the backend, and you can probably modify that workflow or create a similar workflow with additional use cases to create your own use cases for future. It's all about see, logic app is all about creativity, thinking, thinking out of the box. That's what logic app is all about. I may have two use cases in my mind. You probably have four use cases in your mind. Now the question is, how do you implement those use cases using logic app is the question. And that requires practice. Unless you practice with the service, unless you understand the building blocks and configurable options which are there in the service, you will not get good comfort level with it. Logic app is all about practice. The more you practice, the more you understand the service capability. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So let's move on, guys. So I'll close Storage Explorer.
Uh, Raghuveer, as you downloaded this Explorer, right? Storage Explorer.
Mhm.
Is it better to download the Storage Explorer or to better so as to give the operation team for to download in their system the Storage Explorer or to give the access to the storage account in the Azure Logic? I mean, sorry, Azure portal. It will be the feasible.
Yep. See, what basically happens, Storage Explorer is a Microsoft proprietary tool. There is no harm in using it. In fact, in Software Center is a capability that you find in client laptops, Windows 10 and 11. Storage Explorer is by default available to download. So it's a safe tool. You can grant your employees access to Storage Explorer. However, since they are your employees, why would you go with Storage Explorer route? I'm saying uh, as long as you want them to grant access to blob containers or data, you will directly grant them Azure RBAC access to the subscription, to the resource, to the container, to the storage account service, or to the container. Because they are your employees, they already have their identities in your Entra ID, so you can directly grant them access. You should only use the SES use case in a scenario wherein you want to share something with external people who are not your employees, whose identities are not available in your directory, and you can't do that. You can't create their identities, and you have a temporary use case. You only need them to access some data from your system for a limited time. So for that, you don't want to unnecessarily create a service request to your HR or to your identity team to create their identity, give them appropriate right. It requires a lot of approval cycle, right? If I'm delivering this training for TCS, if I request your L&D team to create a TCS email ID for me so that I can easily communicate with you guys over TCS email address, it's a very legitimate request. But trust me, this will not be approved. And if it needs to get approved, it will take a lot of days. It will trigger an approval cycle, approval workflow, which would involve multiple stakeholders. And each stakeholder will have 10 questions to get justification from. And by the time I will get this approved, this training will be over. So sometimes you need to keep it simple. And that is where Azure Storage Explorer comes into the picture. It helps you keep it simple. Azure Storage Explorer is not only used for that, it has multiple use cases. You have seen Azure Storage Explorer service. You can, using Azure Storage Explorer, you can also internally work with other Azure storage services. You can see here, it's not only for storage account. This service equally works. I can basically connect my subscription here, and then I can work with Azure Data Lake service also. I can work with queues and tables also. I can also use storage gateway and attach my local storage here also. So Azure Storage Explorer has multiple use cases. Using Azure Storage Explorer, I can create blob containers. I can move data from one location to another. It has multiple use cases. It is not only meant for vendors, it is also meant for administrators. I use Azure Storage Explorer extensively, at my client engagements, because that way I don't need to log into their Azure subscription. If it is about helping them with storage related issues, I can directly help them from here. All I request them is to grant me is to generate a SES URL with elevated access. I'm saying with all the access so that I can directly manage it from here. So it has multiple use cases, and Microsoft is adding more and more capability to Azure Storage Explorer now. Okay, so it's not for external. It has multiple use cases actually.
And you have shown three axes. One is SaaS, other two is one is EA account, like I guess, like SaaS.
See, there are three options: connection string, SaaS token, and SaaS URL. SES URL, you already know the use case now. Connection string we use in a case when we want our storage service to be accessible by some external application. Let's say you have a database, and that database needs to read some data from storage blob container and also needs to write data to it. So you can use a connection string there. And SES token we will use in a scenario wherein we are using a third party SSO service like Okta, ForgeRock, Ping Federate, SailPoint. Then we can use SES token for integration. Those are the use
And
cases.
the third account key, I guess you are having account key as well, right? Three, I guess, use case. SaaS, connection string, and the third one is only two we have.
I'm saying if you're talking about this, there are three options, as I said. If you only want to work with storage, now this is the connectivity part. Account name and key. When you click on account name and key, see when you click next, it will ask you for your account name and key. This account name and key is your Azure login basically. You're logging into Microsoft Azure, right? So display name you can put anything because display name will be shown here. Your account name is your Entra ID, your UPN, user principal name and key. That's what you need to give. And this account.
So with the help of these, right, we cannot we don't able to. I mean, we don't have to go to browser and log in into Azure.
Absolutely.
We can directly go here and we can do here.
Right? But with this, you can only access storage, and if you want to access the entire all the services, which includes file share, data lake, and other services, then you should use this option, which is subscription. You can select your subscription like Azure, and then click on next, and now it will ask you to authenticate like this. See, it is asking me to authenticate in a browser window. So once I authenticate here, you can see I'm authenticated. So I clicked on it. Since I was already logged in into the browser, it says you're authenticated. Now that I'm authenticated, I will click on close. It's just doing it in the backend. See, it says you are now signed in. Now it shows me my account also here and my default directory, right? So I can click on Open Explorer. Now I have access to my account from here. So I will be able to see everything from my account. I can see all my storage accounts here. This is my storage accounts. All the information I will be able to see when I authenticate from this method, from subscription method. So that's the benefit of this approach.
Yeah, last question, like
Hmm.
actually some operation teams requires files to be get see. I mean, they want to see some files to check to troubleshoot, right? Whether the data is correct or not, and what is there any manipulation in the data? So is it with recommendable option or to see here itself? Is it best better option, right?
It depends. I'm saying depends on the use case, depending on what level of access they have. It differs from company to company. For example, I I support a customer who basically have data services contract to a third party, and that third party is not granted access to customer's environment. That third party is accessing customer's environment data services through Storage Explorer service only. So they have granted customer access to Storage Explorer service only. No other access. So it depends. It differs from use case to use case,
Okay.
right? And then you also have Azure Lighthouse service. If you are working with uh, multiple tenants, or if you are a service provider who wants to provide services to other customers, and those customers do not want to grant your employees access to their tenant, to their directories, then you can use Azure Lighthouse service, which is primarily meant for cross-account access, cross-tenant access. So you can configure, a Lighthouse service, and with Lighthouse service in place, you can onboard your customer's tenant into your Entra tenant, and then you can grant your employees access to customer's tenant. That's another option. It's a bit, I would not say it's a complex service, but this service we primarily use in a case when there are multiple tenants involved, or when you are supporting multiple customers. So that's another use case. So you can read about Azure Lighthouse also. That will also resolve. I'm saying that also comes into picture based on the questions that you're asking.
Okay.
I'll share
Uh,
the documentation.
yeah. Actually, my client requires to check each and every point. They wants to check whether the data is getting or not. So I have some approaches. So because of that, I am asking.
No, that's okay. Absolutely right. That's what I encourage people to ask questions. I don't get irate. You can ask as many as questions, but are on Lighthouse. Read about this documentation. This will give you a great insights. Probably a couple of questions that you have in mind, they will get resolved with this documentation. Or a couple of use cases to which you have not been able to find a solution around based on your customer request. When you go through this documentation, it will help you a lot. This is a great service that helps you manage similar scenarios in a customer environment wherein there are restrictions, wherein there are multiple tenants, wherein there are multiple identities, and there are reservation from customer to provide access, or especially elevated access based on maybe because of security or because of cost implications. Read about this service. Okay,
Okay.
great. Let's move on, guys. We still have 15 minutes left. I want to utilize that time. So let's at least start with compute part. Uh, Now, before we start with compute part, guys, so I'm say, give me a moment here. Let me share some documentation with you as a home assignment so that you can study that. Oh, Okay, that's the documentation for Azure virtual machines. When it comes to Azure Compute Service, there are multiple services in Azure. When it comes, guys, go on mute when you're not. Okay. So when it comes to Azure Compute Service, guys, if I log into Azure portal once again, I lost access. Okay. So when I log into Azure portal, if I navigate to all services, and from there, if I choose compute, you will see multiple services here under compute, and they have been categorized under IaaS, PaaS, serverless, and high performance. There is nothing with the name SaaS here. So these are all the compute services. Obviously, we are not going through all the services because this is not an uh, Azure administrator or Azure architect training, but we need to have basic understanding of Azure Compute Service because it's a core service of Microsoft Azure. And under Compute Service, the most popular, most widely used service is Azure Virtual Machine. So you should have good understanding of virtual machine service. When I say good understanding of virtual machine, I expect you to know how do we provision a virtual machine, what are various configurable options that you will come across that you need to configure while provisioning a virtual machine, what are typical troubleshooting that you will do with a virtual machine, and what are the common call drivers for a virtual machine. These are the 4 or 5 things you need to be aware of. And why do we need virtual machine here? Because when we after virtual machine, we will talk about monitoring, and then we will talk about Entra. So the first thing that we do in Entra is to build an on-premises directory environment. We will we will provision an Azure virtual machine. On that virtual machine, we will deploy Active Directory domain services. We will build an on-premises Active Directory environment, which will be a replica of a production environment, which will contain group policies, OUs, sites and services, users and computers, security groups, users with varying level of access. We will try to create a replica of it. And then we will have it synchronized with Microsoft Entra ID using Entra Connect Sync service. And we will look at the possibilities of password enhanced synchronization, uh, pass-through authentication, password write back, reverse connect, the capabilities that synchronization brings on the table. We look at those capabilities, and once those identities are synchronized in Entra, then we will look at Entra configuration. That how do I assign those identities appropriate Entra roles or Azure RBAC roles. So this is what we will start our Entra service with. So that is where understanding of virtual machine, storage service, and network service is very important, because all of these three services will work together to help us build a lab environment that will be used for working with Entra capabilities. You will do some capabilities of Entra in this training that are not accessible to you. Because when you are supporting Entra for your customer, you cannot have global admin access allocated to you. Your customer may probably have given you restricted access. So if you are doing app registration, you probably have got that access only. If you are doing some conditional access configuration, you have got that role only. Here in this training, you have got global admin role, which means every minute access of Entra is available to you. So this training or this month is an opportunity, because your subscription will expire on 10th of October. So these days are your opportunity to explore every minute capability of Entra that you always wanted to, but because of restrictions put forwarded by your customer or your business, you could never do that. So this is your opportunity, and that is where I'm saying again and again, I can only cover 10%. Remaining 90% you need to do it yourself, which basically means I will talk about the capability, I will show some demos, I will have you do some hands-on lab, but I cannot cover everything which is there. But with your help, if you practice yourself, if you come with questions, if you come with scenarios which is configured in your environment, and if you have specific roadblock and you discuss it with me, it will help everyone. So you need to practice it yourself. My job is to just share my knowledge and experience and probably try and cover the concepts around SC300. That's what I'm doing in this training. Otherwise, Entra is a very comprehensive service. With the introduction of Entra ID, or last year in October, they have added some additional capabilities also, which are outside of the purview of this training. But if you have interest, go ahead and start explore them, configure it, and come back with questions. That is the right approach. Okay. So with that said, so these are my compute services. Here I will be focusing on virtual machine service. And along with virtual machine, you will automatically understand the concepts of availability set, proximity placement group. You will understand the concept of images. We will not get into app services, I would say PaaS services at all, but these are your PaaS services. We will definitely not do this Kubernetes and containers part because that's not your core domain and you will not be dealing with these services at all. And also, when it comes to Kubernetes and container, Entra has a very limited role here because Kubernetes is designed to have its own network security and authentication capabilities there. Okay, Anusha, we have only 2 recorded videos. Yeah, Farhan actually talked about this issue. In fact, I also experienced it. I was not able to see those videos. I will fix it. Don't worry. And then hybrid. So these are the services here. So this is what we are going to do. We will do that. We will start with virtual machine service from tomorrow onwards. Now, what I want you to do before we start with virtual machine service, I want you to go through uh, the virtual machine, the virtual machine in Azure documentation from theoretical perspective to understand all the service capabilities, overview, significance, and use cases that it supports. And if you are interested, if you're somebody who learn more from videos, then you can watch this video. Okay, I think which is here, wherein I'm talking about virtual machines. This video. So I'll share the video URL also. So you can watch this video. This video will help you understand Azure Virtual Machine overview with respect to what is an Azure Virtual Machine, how does a virtual machine architecture looks like, what are the building blocks of it, how they are integrated with one another, how do we provision a virtual machine from Azure portal, all the configurable options which are available, and some basic operations around virtual machine, which is to assigning a public IP to a virtual machine, creating and attaching a new disk to a virtual machine, resizing the virtual machine, or changing the size of a disk, deleting a virtual machine, troubleshooting virtual machine connectivity, changing password of a virtual machine when you lose it. So multiple use cases that you will see in this video and the subsequent video, which is related to virtual machine. So go through these videos and you will learn a lot about virtual machines, and that will help you in the session tomorrow when we start with virtual machine